Friends, please check if you're already subscribed to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us. We need to reach 1,000 subscribers to generate income and continue with the channel. Now, let's get to the video. I remember the exact moment the air changed, even before anyone raised their voice. It was the way my mother smiled without looking at me, the way my father cleared his throat like he was about to make an announcement that didn't include my name. We were at a family event, one of those gatherings that pretends to be casual but feels like a performance. Long table, white tablecloth, food laid out like proof that everything in this family was abundant and fine. And me, seated halfway down the table, posture careful, hands folded, already bracing for the familiar erasure. They spoke over me the first time so smoothly I almost missed it. I had just begun a sentence, something small, harmless, about my job, about a decision I'd made, when my father's voice slid right on top of mine. Louder. Certain. Final. No pause. No, sorry. Just a takeover. Laughter followed from my uncles, my cousins nodding along as if he'd said something profound. I stopped talking mid-word. The sound died in my throat. Nobody noticed. I told myself it was nothing. I always told myself that. I had learned early how to shrink a reaction until it fit into silence. But the second time it happened, something in my chest tightened. My mother leaned forward, eyes bright, interrupting me with a story I had already told her in private. She told it better, apparently. Or at least louder. She took my experience, smoothed it out, made it palatable, and handed it to the table like a dish she'd prepared herself. And everyone ate. I looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice that I'd gone quiet. My cousin across from me avoided my eyes. My aunt nodded approvingly at my mother. Even my younger brother, who knew exactly what was happening, kept his head down. The message was clear and old: this is how it works. They were confident I would stay quiet. Confident I wouldn't challenge the rhythm they'd perfected over decades. Inside, my thoughts were anything but quiet. They were sharp. Fast. Angry. I felt like a ghost at my own table, watching my life be narrated by people who never asked how it felt to live it. My chest burned with words I didn't say. With sentences that deserved space. With truths that would make the table uncomfortable. I tried again. Softer this time. Careful. I waited for a pause. There was one, barely a breath, and I stepped into it. Actually, what happened was, my father laughed. Not cruelly. Casually. As if my voice was a child tugging at his sleeve during an adult conversation. He raised his glass and launched into a toast that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with control. The room leaned toward him. Glasses clinked. My words evaporated. That was when I realized this wasn't accidental. This wasn't forgetfulness or excitement or bad timing. This was a script. And I had been cast as the quiet one. The agreeable one. The daughter who nods, smiles, absorbs. The daughter who doesn't disrupt the image. I felt heat rise up my neck, my pulse loud in my ears. Part of me wanted to disappear, to retreat to the bathroom, to my phone, to anywhere but that chair. Another part of me, deeper and far more dangerous, was waking up. A part that remembered every time I'd been spoken over. Every decision dismissed. Every truth rewritten by someone who thought they knew me better than I knew myself. As the conversation swelled around me, I sat there perfectly still, eyes forward, lips closed. To them, I looked compliant. Unbothered. Quiet. But inside, I was making a promise. And I didn't yet know how loud that promise would become. Silence, for me, was never empty. It was trained. Conditioned. Shaped carefully over years of dinners like that one, where my role was to listen, absorb, and never take up more space than what was politely allowed. As the voices overlapped around the table, I could feel that old muscle memory activating, shoulders relaxing downward, spine shrinking just a little, breath becoming shallow. This was the version of me they trusted. The one who wouldn't interrupt the narrative they preferred. My mother's hand brushed my arm at some point. Not a question. Not comfort. A reminder. Her nails were freshly done, glossy, immaculate. She smiled at someone else while touching me, like I was furniture she was reassuring herself hadn't moved. I hated how familiar that gesture felt. They were discussing my future now. Or at least, their version of it. Where I should be. What I should want. What would make sense for me. I listened to my life being reduced to bullet points, each one approved by consensus. No one asked me anything. No one noticed that my fork hadn't moved in minutes. I remembered being a child, standing in the living room with a report card in my hands, trying to explain a grade that wasn't perfect. My father had talked over me then too. Same tone. Same certainty. Same impatience. "We know what happened," he'd said, before I ever finished my sentence. And just like that, my truth had become irrelevant. That memory sat beside me at the table now, heavy and undeniable. Someone joked about how quiet I was. Laughter followed. "She's always been like that," my mother said lightly. Always. As if it were a personality trait instead of a survival strategy. As if my silence hadn't been carved into me, one interruption at a time. I smiled. Automatically. That smile had saved me so many arguments. It was the smile of peacekeeping. Of compliance. Of a woman who learned that being easy was safer than being honest. But this time, the smile felt wrong on my face, like a costume I'd outgrown but kept wearing because everyone else expected it. If this is resonating with you, if you've ever been the quiet one in a loud room, take a second to hit like. You're not alone in this, even if it felt that way at the table. My chest tightened again, but now there was something else layered underneath the discomfort. Awareness. I started noticing patterns I had never allowed myself to name. How my father never interrupted my brother the way he interrupted me. How my mother framed my silence as virtue, but called other women difficult for speaking up. How the family dynamic depended on me staying exactly where I was. Still. Predictable. Small. The realization didn't explode. It seeped in slowly, like cold water through fabric. And with it came a question I had avoided my entire life: what would actually happen if I didn't stay quiet? The answer scared me more than their voices ever had. Because I knew it wouldn't be gentle. It wouldn't be polite. It wouldn't be received with understanding smiles and nods. It would disrupt something. It would expose something. And once exposed, there would be no going back to the version of me they were comfortable with. Across the table, my father raised his voice again, talking over my cousin now. The room adjusted instinctively, attention snapping back to him. Authority, unquestioned. I watched it happen like an outsider, like someone studying a system instead of living inside it. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt alert. As dessert was brought out and conversation splintered into smaller clusters, I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was listening differently now. Listening for weaknesses. Listening for assumptions. Listening for the moment when silence would no longer serve me. They thought this dinner was just another successful performance. Another night where the hierarchy held, where the roles stayed intact. They didn't know something had shifted. And they definitely didn't know how close I was to speaking. The drive home was silent. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses against your ears, that forces your thoughts to get louder because there's nothing else to drown them out. Streetlights passed in slow, rhythmic flashes, illuminating my reflection in the window, eyes tired, jaw tight, lips pressed together like they were holding something back. I replayed the night in fragments. The interruptions. The laughter. The way my name had been used without me being addressed. And for the first time, I didn't soften those memories. I didn't excuse them. I let them be exactly what they were. Disrespect doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles. At home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the doorway, heels still on, coat still draped over my shoulders, as if moving forward meant committing to something I wasn't ready to name. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "You were very quiet tonight. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen. The irony almost made me laugh. They noticed my silence when it concerned them. When it broke from the expected rhythm. Not when it was being imposed, only when it felt inconvenient. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. What I wanted to say wouldn't fit in a text message. It wouldn't fit in any format they were prepared to receive. So I replied with the same politeness I'd been taught. "I'm fine. Just tired." The lie slid out easily. Too easily. I kicked off my shoes and sank onto the couch, the quiet of my apartment wrapping around me. This space was mine. No interruptions. No narrator speaking over me. Just my own thoughts, finally allowed to finish a sentence. That's when it hit me, my silence at the table hadn't been forced tonight. Not entirely. I had chosen it. And that choice carried weight. I could have spoken. I had openings, small ones, imperfect ones, but real. I didn't take them. Not because I was powerless, but because I was calculating. Measuring. Watching. I had been gathering something instead of surrendering. Clarity. There's a difference between being silenced and staying silent. One is taken from you. The other is strategic. If this shift feels familiar, if you've ever realized too late that you're not as powerless as you were taught, go ahead and subscribe. This story is only beginning. I went to bed that night without setting an alarm. Sleep came in fragments, filled with half-dreams and old arguments that never finished. In one, I was standing at that same table, everyone frozen mid-sentence, mouths open, eyes locked on me. In the dream, I spoke. I don't remember what I said, only the feeling afterward. Light. Terrifying. Free. I woke up before dawn with my heart racing. The question that greeted me wasn't "why don't they listen to me?" anymore. It was what happens when they have no choice but to. Over the next few days, I noticed how often my parents reached out. Small things. Unnecessary things. Questions they already knew the answer to. It was subtle, but I felt it, the recalibration. My quiet at the dinner had unsettled something. They were checking the edges, making sure I was still where they left me. I answered kindly. Briefly. Without offering extra. Each interaction felt like another step back from the role they had written for me. And with every step, the tension grew. Because systems don't like when one piece starts moving differently. I knew the next family gathering would be the real test. They would speak over me again. Of that, I had no doubt. The only question left was whether I would let them. The invitation came 3 days later. Casual. Almost sweet. A group message from my mother, complete with smiling emojis and too many exclamation points. Dinner at our place this Sunday. Just family. Hope you can make it. Just family. Those words always carried weight. They sounded warm, inclusive, but they came with expectations stitched into every letter. Roles to be resumed. Patterns to be honored. Silence to be maintained. I stared at the message longer than necessary. My thumb hovered over the screen, the familiar reflex ready to type of course. Without hesitation. That was who I'd been. Reliable. Predictable. The daughter who showed up and didn't complicate things. But something in me resisted. Sunday felt close. Too close. Like a challenge issued politely. Like they sensed the shift and wanted to correct it before it became visible to anyone else. I replied an hour later. I'll be there. No emoji. No enthusiasm. Just a statement. The day itself arrived heavy with anticipation. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Black sweater. Simple earrings. Nothing that invited commentary. Nothing that asked permission. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I searched for signs of the old hesitation, the tightening in my shoulders. It was there, but so was something new. Resolve, maybe. Or readiness. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual. Muscle memory tried to take over, rehearsing the usual responses, the deflections, the half-answers that kept the peace. I let them play out in my head, then set them aside. I wasn't there to perform tonight. The house looked the same as it always had. Lights warm. Curtains drawn. The illusion of comfort intact. My mother opened the door with that familiar smile, the one that scanned me quickly, assessing mood, posture, compliance. She hugged me a second longer than necessary. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I am," I said. And this time, it wasn't a lie. At the table, the dynamic resumed almost immediately. My father dominated the conversation, recounting a story I'd heard a dozen times. My brother nodded along. My aunt chimed in. The rhythm was practiced, efficient. I waited. When my father paused to take a sip of water, I spoke. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just clearly. "That's not how it happened." The table froze. Forks hovered midair. My mother's smile faltered. My father blinked, once, as if processing an unexpected noise. "What?" he said. "You're skipping a part," I continued, heart pounding but voice steady. "And it changes the whole story." There it was. The moment I'd been imagining since that first dinner. Smaller than I expected. Quieter. But infinitely heavier. My father laughed, short, dismissive. "That's not important." "It is to me," I said. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't imposed. It was earned. Claimed. If you're feeling this moment, if you know the risk of correcting a narrative that benefits everyone but you, hit like. Speaking up always costs something. My mother tried to smooth things over. "Let's not get into this now." "Why not?" I asked, turning to her. "We're already in it." Her eyes searched mine, looking for the daughter who would back down. She didn't find her. The tension thickened, pressing against the walls, the ceiling. This wasn't an argument yet, but it was a fracture. A visible one. And fractures, once seen, can't be unseen. I felt exposed. Vulnerable. Powerful. And I knew this was only the beginning. No one spoke for a moment after that. The silence stretched, unfamiliar and uncomfortable, like a room rearranged in the dark. My father set his glass down slowly, deliberately, as if every movement needed to reassert control. "You're being sensitive," he said finally. Calm. Measured. The tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while ending the conversation. I felt the old reflex surge, apologize, soften, retreat. Years of training don't disappear in one brave sentence. But I stayed where I was. I let the discomfort sit. "I'm being accurate," I replied. "There's a difference." My mother inhaled sharply. My brother shifted in his seat. No one rushed to my defense. I hadn't expected them to. This wasn't about allies. This was about truth occupying space. My father shook his head. This isn't the time. When would be? I asked. The question landed heavier than I intended. Not because it was loud, but because it was fair. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to my brother, redirecting the conversation like nothing had happened. A classic move. Erase the interruption. Restore order. But something had changed. They continued talking, but the rhythm was off. Every sentence felt slightly strained, like a song played in the wrong key. And for the first time, I didn't disappear into that rhythm. I stayed present. Watching. Listening. I noticed how often my mother glanced at me now. Measuring. Monitoring. I noticed how my father avoided looking in my direction. Control doesn't like being questioned, it prefers to pretend the challenge never occurred. Inside, fear and clarity wrestled. I knew there would be consequences. Not dramatic ones. Not yelling or slammed doors. It would be quieter than that. Coldness. Distance. Reframing me as difficult. As changed. As a problem. And yet, I felt lighter. Halfway through dinner, my aunt asked me a question directly. A simple one. But it mattered. She waited for my answer. No one interrupted. I spoke, slowly at first, then with more confidence as the words came. My voice sounded different to my own ears. Steadier. Fuller. It lasted less than a minute. But it was mine. If you've ever paid a price just to say one honest sentence, subscribe. This story understands that cost. After dessert, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. The lights were dimmer there, the air thick with unspoken things. You didn't have to challenge him like that, she said quietly. You know how he is. I met her gaze. I know how you are too. She flinched. Not visibly, but enough. That was the real cost. Not their anger. Their recognition. The understanding that I saw the system now. That I wasn't confused. That I wasn't naive. I left shortly after. No hugs. No warmth. Just polite goodbyes that felt like negotiations. In my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. I hadn't won anything. But I had crossed a line. And there was no going back. The aftermath wasn't loud. There were no angry phone calls. No confrontations. No dramatic ultimatums. That's what surprised me most. I had braced myself for noise, for punishment that announced itself clearly. Instead, it came quietly. Days passed without messages. The group chat went silent. When I did hear from my parents, it was clipped. Polite. Functional. Like coworkers maintaining professionalism after an unresolved conflict. The warmth was gone, replaced by something colder and far more deliberate. Distance. At first, I questioned myself. That old doubt crept back in, whispering familiar lies. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe it wasn't that serious. Maybe this is just how families are. But then I remembered the table. The pause. The way the room had shifted when I spoke. And I knew this wasn't accidental. They weren't confused. They were recalibrating. Control doesn't disappear when challenged, it adapts. It changes tactics. It waits. And that waiting carries its own kind of threat, because it invites you to fold first. To reach out. To apologize for making things uncomfortable. I didn't. That restraint was harder than speaking up. Silence, when chosen intentionally, feels very different from silence forced on you. This one burned. It demanded discipline. It demanded I sit with the discomfort instead of soothing theirs. One evening, my brother called. His voice was cautious, like he was stepping onto thin ice. "Things are weird," he said. "I know," I replied. "You didn't have to go that far." There it was. The family translation. Going that far meant saying one true thing out loud. "I went exactly as far as I needed to," I said. He sighed. "You know how Dad takes that stuff." "Yes," I said. "And now he knows how I do." He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was softer. "Just, be careful." After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, the quiet pressing in again, but this time, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt honest. I was grieving something, even if I didn't fully understand what yet. The illusion, maybe. The version of family where I could belong without shrinking. If this part feels heavy, if you're realizing that growth sometimes costs relationships, leave a like. This is the part people don't talk about enough. A week later, my mother finally called. Her voice was calm, measured, rehearsed. "We're worried about you," she said. I almost laughed. Almost. "Why?" I asked. "You seem different." Different. Not unkind. Not wrong. Just different. As if staying silent had been my defining feature all along. "I am," I said. "And that's not a problem." She paused. I imagined her tightening her grip on the phone, recalculating again. "We just want peace," she said. "So do I replied. "That's why I'm done pretending." The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Colder now. Defensive. "Well," she said, "we'll have to see how things go." After the call ended, I felt the weight of that sentence settle in. "We'll have to see." As if my honesty were a phase. As if my voice were something they could wait out. They still believed this would pass. They were wrong. The next family gathering came sooner than I expected. A birthday. Public. Extended family. The kind of setting where appearances mattered more than truth, and where my parents felt safest performing unity. I almost didn't go. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what it would cost. Showing up meant refusing to disappear. It meant being visible in a space that had thrived on my invisibility. But avoidance would have been its own kind of surrender. So I went. The room buzzed with overlapping conversations, laughter bouncing off the walls. The moment I stepped inside, I felt eyes on me. Curious. Assessing. Word travels fast in families like mine, especially when a woman steps out of line. My mother greeted me warmly, too warmly. Her smile was wide, practiced. Her hand lingered on my back just long enough to signal ownership. "We're fine," the gesture said. "Nothing to see here." I didn't correct her. Not yet. As we gathered around the table, the pattern attempted to reassert itself. My father spoke. People listened. Stories unfolded with him at the center. I observed quietly, not shrinking this time, but studying. Then someone asked me a question. Direct. Unavoidable. "What do you think?" The room tilted slightly. I felt it, the collective pause. My father glanced at me, just briefly, a warning disguised as curiosity. I answered. I didn't rush. I didn't soften. I didn't apologize for taking up time. I spoke like someone who expected to be heard. No one interrupted. Not because they'd changed, but because they didn't know how to stop me anymore. If you've ever felt the room shift when you finally spoke like you mattered, subscribe. These moments are rare and powerful. My father tried to interject halfway through. Old habit. Old instinct. I kept going. Not louder. Just steady. My voice didn't waver, even though my heart was racing. When I finished, the silence that followed was thick, but different from before. Not dismissive. Uncertain. My aunt nodded slowly. Someone else agreed with me. Out loud. That was when I saw it, real fear, flickering behind my father's eyes. Not anger. Not frustration. Loss. He was losing control of the version of me he'd curated. The quiet daughter. The agreeable one. The background presence that made him look good without ever challenging him. This version of me didn't fit. Later, my mother cornered me near the kitchen. Her voice was low, urgent. "You're making things awkward," she said. "I'm answering questions," I replied. "You don't need to say everything you think." I met her gaze. "Neither do you. But you always have." That ended the conversation. I left early again. This time, no one tried to stop me. In the car, I realized something that both terrified and thrilled me: they couldn't put me back. Not because I was louder. Not because I was cruel. But because I had changed the terms. I no longer waited to be invited into conversations about my own life. And once a woman stops asking permission to exist fully, the system breaks. After that night, the language changed. Not the silence, that had already evolved, but the words they used when they finally addressed what was happening. It showed up in side comments, in carefully phrased concerns, in conversations that weren't meant for me but were never fully hidden either. "She's changed. She's gotten bold. She doesn't know how to speak to her elders anymore." Disrespect. That was the word my father finally chose when he called me a week later. His voice was controlled, but the anger sat just beneath the surface, vibrating like a held note. "I don't know who you think you are lately," he said. "But the way you talk, it's disrespectful." I let the word hang between us. Disrespect had always meant one thing in this family: you're no longer convenient. "I speak the same way you do," I replied. "That's not the point." "No," I said. "That's exactly the point." Silence crackled on the line. I could almost hear him recalculating, searching for the version of authority that used to work on me. The guilt. The obligation. The reminder of everything he'd provided. "I raised you better than this," he said finally. And there it was. The emotional invoice. The idea that my voice was a debt I owed them interest on. "You raised me to think," I said. "I'm using that." The call ended shortly after. Not with resolution. With retreat. Afterward, I sat very still, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Speaking to him like that would have once felt impossible. Unthinkable. Now it felt necessary. Like stretching a muscle that had been tight for years. If you're realizing that respect is often just silence in disguise, leave a like. This story knows that word well. The pushback intensified in quieter ways. Invitations that didn't come. Conversations I learned about after the fact. Decisions made, for the good of the family, that excluded me. It hurt. Not because I doubted myself, but because clarity doesn't cancel grief. I was mourning the version of belonging that required my disappearance. I was mourning parents who loved the idea of me more than the reality. One night, lying in bed, I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. If this is the price of being heard, is it worth it? The answer came quickly. Uncomfortably quickly. Yes. Because the alternative was erasure. Slow. Polite. Smiling erasure. And I had already survived enough of that. They could call it disrespect. They could call me difficult. They could rewrite the story however they wanted. But they could no longer speak over me. And that was the part they couldn't forgive. The breaking point didn't arrive with a shout. It arrived quietly, disguised as a favor. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice had that careful sweetness, the one she used when she wanted something but didn't want it to sound like control. "We're having everyone over this weekend," she said. "Your father thought it might be nice if you shared a little update about your plans. You know, clear the air. Clear the air." What she meant was, put yourself back in your place, publicly. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, the phone warm against my ear. I could already picture it, the table, the expectant faces, my father poised to correct me if my words drifted too far from the approved version. "I'm not doing that," I said. She paused. Just long enough to register surprise. "Why not?" "Because my life isn't a group project," I replied. "And I'm done presenting it for approval." Her tone sharpened. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being honest." That was when the mask slipped. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. The accusation landed heavy, but it didn't crush me the way it once would have. I recognized it now. The last card. The one they play when obedience fails. "I didn't tear anything apart," I said. "I just stopped holding it together by myself." Silence. Then, cold and final, "If you can't be respectful, maybe you shouldn't come." There it was. The line in the sand. For a moment, grief surged, sharp and sudden. Not because I was uninvited, but because a part of me had hoped they would choose differently. That they would bend, even slightly. They didn't. "I understand," I said. And I meant it. When the call ended, my hands were steady. My breath was even. That scared me more than panic ever could. Because it meant this wasn't impulsive. This was alignment. That weekend, while they gathered without me, I stayed home. I cooked a meal for one. I played music too loud. I spoke out loud to myself just to hear my own voice fill the room. And something incredible happened. Nothing collapsed. The world didn't end. I wasn't swallowed by regret. The silence that followed wasn't punishing, it was peaceful. Spacious. Mine. If you're watching this and realizing that choosing yourself sometimes means being excluded, subscribe. This is where the story gets real. A few days later, my brother texted. "Dad's furious. Mom's hurt. They think you're trying to prove something." I typed back slowly. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just done disappearing." He didn't reply. That was when I knew. They understood now. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't something they could wait out. I wasn't coming back to the version of me that stayed quiet to keep the peace. And the scariest part. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Freedom didn't arrive as celebration. There were no fireworks. No sudden happiness. It came slowly, in the smallest moments, when my phone didn't buzz with guilt, when my weekends felt longer, when my thoughts no longer needed permission to exist. Weeks passed. Then months. The distance with my parents settled into something permanent. Not dramatic. Not hostile. Just distant. Polite messages on birthdays. Short replies. A version of connection stripped of intimacy and control. They never apologized. They never acknowledged what really happened. But they stopped interrupting me. When we did speak, there was a hesitation now. A pause before they responded. As if they were learning a new language and afraid of getting it wrong. My father no longer narrated my life. My mother no longer corrected my tone. They listened. Not deeply. Not warmly. But enough. And that was the quiet victory no one warned me about, the kind that doesn't look like revenge from the outside, but feels like justice on the inside. One afternoon, sitting alone with a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, I realized something that stopped me cold. I wasn't rehearsing conversations anymore. I wasn't bracing myself before speaking. I wasn't shrinking my words to fit someone else's comfort. The voice they once spoke over had finally found room. If this story has touched something in you, if you've ever been confident you would stay quiet, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Your voice deserves space too. They still tell the story differently when I'm not there. I know that. In their version, I changed. I became distant. I became difficult. In mine, I became whole. And that's the part that matters. Because the truth is, I didn't lose my family that day at the table. I lost the role they assigned me. And what I gained was far louder than anything they ever said over me.